Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Film Fellas. There's just going to be me here, Julian, and I just thought we'd discuss Superman the movie. I've got some notes in front of me, and I was chatting to the guys, and I always wanted to kind of do something on Superman the movie and why I consider it the gold standard of comic book movies. You'll have to forgive me. Got a bit of a sore throat, so I'm going to drink my vanilla chai while we discuss this. And I think these days, as comic book fans and fans of popular culture, we're literally spoiled with a wealth of content at the minute, pushed out onto cinema screens and streaming services. I mean, at the moment, not a week goes by, it seems, that Disney Plus aren't pushing out some new comic book film. And so Disney's acquisition of Marvel and Fox properties, as well as Lucasfilm's IPs, means we are spoiled, and there's a wealth of content for everybody to kind of go for. But this wasn't always the case. I mean, it wasn't until really the mid-1990s that comic books being turned into movies really began to get traction with the likes of Blade and the X-Men series and Daredevil, Spawn and Elektra. Up until that point, we'd lived off the diet of Batman movies and some dodgy Spider-Man B movies and Fantastic Four, Roger Corman efforts. And the less said about Howard the Duck, the better. I mean, we could rewind before that. Of course, we had some early black and white and colour Superman TV shows and Flash Gordon TV shows. I think Doc Savage in the mid '60s was certainly an early effort of a comic book movie. But really, the only significant property up until probably the late '80s, when Batman hit the screen, to really have some huge budget put behind it and real talent involved in it, was the Man of Steel himself, Superman. His series of movies started in 1978, starring Christopher Reeve in Superman the movie, and continued up until 1987 with, quite frankly, what is a very woeful film, Superman's Quest for Peace. In fact, while Superman 2 was a solid effort, it's safe to say that movies 3 and 4, starring Christopher Reeve, really didn't do a good job. In fact, they did a lot of harm to Superman's movies in general. And I've got a bit of a soft spot for Superman 3. I think Richard Pryor, certainly adds an extra dimension to it. But it's very Superman light. Superman does comedy almost. But one film that has always stood the test of time for me, and to me is still the gold standard of comic book movies, is Superman the movie. And okay, you could argue that certainly the Avengers, Endgame, and films like that and Iron Man certainly are great films. They're really good films. But are they better than the original Superman movie? Probably not. And yes, of course, they owe a huge debt to it. But I just wanted to kind of just take some time to discover and kind of talk about why Superman's first foray onto the silver screen, really was a turning point for comic book movies. And they don't come much better than Richard Donner's Superman the movie. You see, it is hard to match the emotional payoff that was given to Avengers Endgame. And it's safe to say at the minute, Marvel is seemingly suffering from a post-Endgame hangover, and DT's output has been inconsistent at best. Joker and the Batman certainly, are interesting movies, and have got a lot of fan love behind them. And I think this kind of, when they go back to being a little bit more grounded, like the Nolan Batman films, I think they show that comic book movies can have a lot of depth, and just be more than just PlayStation cutscenes. I always think it's interesting that Mark Kermode will often say things like, it was all really good. And in fact, I remember his review of the Man of Steel was a really good movie up until the third act, when it had to kind of do all the banging and crashy stuff. And and I think DC's output could really go back and look at Superman the movie and look at how the care and attention and the talent involved, in that actual movie, which was done in 1978, and hopefully, with James Gunn on board of the new Superman movie, we'll hopefully get something that has a little bit more kind of groundedness, a little bit more reality in there, and something that has an emotional heart at the center. And that's really what Donner's movie has. In fact, I always think it's interesting that there's a quote where it says, 40 years later, it's impossible to overestimate the cinematic superpowers of Richard Donner's masterwork. The end result of many attempts to bring DC Comics icon onto the big screen, the 1978 classic is a template all superheroes overlook at their peril. And it won't surprise me if, even though it's clear that Gunn is going to do a very different story to Superman the movie, I bet he's taken a close look at it, but hopefully not too close a look at it in the same way that Superman Returns suffered by almost kind of being weighed down by Donner's effort. So let's have a talk about the plot, and we'll kind of then break down the movie, and I'll talk about why I really rate it as a film. So similar to Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, Superman the movie starts on the planet Krypton and basically hits the same story beats as Snyder's take. Krypton is dying, Zod and Co are sent into the Phantom Zone, and Jor-El, in this case played by Marlon Brando, in obviously Snyder's one, he's played by Russell Crowe. Interestingly, I wonder whether Russell Crowe got paid anywhere near Marlon Brando's fee. I think Brando got paid like $3.7 million for 2 weeks' work on Superman, and also then had top billing, even above Gene Hackman and Christopher Reeve. Anyway, I digress. Ultimately, Krypton is dying, and they choose to send their son to Earth. And so on Earth, Superman is discovered by the Kents and raised on a farm before going to journey north up to Antarctic and create the Fortress of Solitude, and then goes and takes a job as a reporter at the Daily Planet, which is where he meets Lois Lane. Now, this is where Man of Steel and Superman the movie essentially separate, as Man of Steel effectively takes on the story arc that was covered in Superman 2. Movie geeks out there will know that back in the 70s, Donner actually shot 75% of Superman 2 back to back with Superman the movie before having a fallout with the producers, and basically he was then contracted to just deliver the first film before being asked to leave the project. Anyway, in Superman the movie, Superman discovers Lex Luthor's plan to essentially create a new West Coast using the San Andreas fault line and some stolen missiles, as well as discovering the kryptonite. That kryptonite will stop Superman. Now, we won't spoil what happens, but needless to say that the third act of the film is thrilling. It's emotionally satisfying. There's a number of elements throughout the film that contribute to it being a timeless good versus evil classic. And that's where we'll focus on the rest of this episode. I don't really want to spoil the ending. You could probably guess what happens. Needless to say, the third act of the film is thrilling. It's emotionally satisfying as well. It's a great film. I mean, I saw the film when I was probably about 8 years old or something like that. I always remember watching it and just being amazed by it and enthralled by it. And one of the things that always stood out to me, which still puts a smile on my face to this day, and actually, when Superman Returns came out, I actually thought that that big smile across my face happened again. And it's with the opening kind of credits. The original theatrical version of Superman the movie begins actually with a child's voice and a hand opening up Action Comics #1, where Superman made his first appearance. And as the pages are turned, we are then transported into space, where something magical happens, and then we get the opening beats to a theme, which is undeniably one of the greatest themes in cinema history. And I think when Superman Returns redid this, they really, really smashed it out of the park. And the fact that they took on the theme, and I guess that's one of my kind of little gripes about Man of Steel, that they never took on the Superman the movie theme, which is odd, because when you think of James Bond, you think of the James Bond theme, and that kind of, signature music is carried with the character. And so why would you not continue to have his calling card, if you like? Anyway, and we digress again. But ultimately, the music is written by one of the greatest composers ever, John Williams. And Jaws, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Harry Potter. But this is arguably his greatest piece of music, instantly recognizable. And Bryan Singer really, really smashed it out of the park, as I said before, with his opening titles of this. And I actually think that his use of Brando's words in Kal-El's speech of hope to his son at the beginning of Superman Returns was a bit of divine inspiration. So, the opening of Superman Returns, the way it's constructed, by Bryan Singer, he clearly wanted to recreate the feelings and emotions he had as a child in 1978, sat in the cinema and seeing those opening titles and music for the first time. And that sense of excitement, the build of music, the crescendo of sound, and the catchiness of the theme ensured many a schoolchild will be humming it in playgrounds and bedrooms all across the world as they acted out their favourite scenes. So, the first masterstroke of Superman the movie is John Williams' theme, and the way it uses the typography and the design to just create this sense of excitement. I think the next masterstroke of Superman the movie is then Christopher Reeve. I think there's always, when you've got major kind of film characters like Bond and Superman, there's always going to be fan debate as to who is the best version on the big screen. And I would actually like to say that I think Brandon Routh's performance is largely, sadly, overlooked. But we still doff our caps and say he's given us probably one of the most crowd-pleasing Superman moments in that boat scene in Superman Returns. I think that whole scene where he rises from the water, holding the boat, is just such a crowd-pleasing moment. And I think Roof is underrated in the role. And Cavill's Superman is just fantastic. And I think it's a shame that the movies that Cavill was given, I kind of, it's almost the same with Pierce Brosnan's Bond. While GoldenEye was a great entry, they just got steadily worse. And I think that's, with Cavill, it's the same, really. He's kind of, Batman v Superman was awful. The original Justice League cut wasn't great. I think certainly his Snyder cut is a lot better. But I do, I think it's a real shame that Cavill wasn't given the chance to have another movie. And I always think that the standout for Cavill Superman was when he flies for the first time. And I think Zimmer's score is pretty good. But I think, Cavill's performance, that kind of boyish sense of wonder and laughing and things like that, and that that he discovers that he can fly and he's almost invincible. It's fantastic. But for me, still, the gold standard of Superman performances is Christopher Reeve. Really, because Reeve perfectly encapsulates the dual personality of Superman and his heroic performance. I think that the way he switches between bumbling Clark Kent and Superman is just pitched perfectly and accentuates that kind of, can hide in plain sight, and that with just the removal of his glasses and a change in poise, which is actually highlighted in that fantastic scene in Superman 2 when he reveals his identity to Lois. He basically just takes off his glasses and the poise just alters, and he literally is Superman. And and I think it's testament to Reeve's dedication as an actor, that when he was cast, he was really slim, and they were going to put a muscle suit on him, but Reeve instead, insisted on training for the role. And looking at Reeve's performance retrospectively, you can just say that it really is a great performance. In fact, there's a really kind of good quote here from Roger Ebert, who said, Chris Evans, Captain America, Chadwick Boseman's Black Panther, and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman are the only modern superheroes that get close to the Reeve vibe. They give performances as people who are serene and confident in their goodness. They seem to know that if you can play that kind of energy without winking at the audience to signal that you're not actually square, it'll be as arresting as any villain's scenery chewing. And I think, you know, similarly, the Guardian paid tribute when Reeve died to Christopher Reeve's performance by saying Reeve was picturesque, an on-screen soul with dignity, diplomacy, and compassion. His benevolence cast a longer shadow than his cape. He was the poster boy for movie escapism at the end of the decade that saw the likes of Nixon and Vietnam leave America's psyche in a precarious way. And you know, and it is sad that Reeve's career was cut short by the horse riding accident and the disability that followed. You know, but his performance as Superman, certainly in the first two movies, is absolutely brilliant. In fact, I actually saw the diner scene from Superman 2 the other day, and you know, that transformation of where he walks in as Clark Kent, as the kind of the bumbling, you know, been lifting weights and things like that. The performance is just superb and really captures the kind of duality of Superman. But you know, that's not you know, the only reason why Superman the movie is still the gold standard. I think one of the best scenes, best introductions to a superhero on the movie screen has to still be the helicopter scene and the rescue from the Daily Planet building. And I think this genius of a scene lies in Donner's direction. And you know, Donner has proved with all his movies that he really knows how to do a great action movies. You know, look at any of the Lethal Weapon movies and things like that. You know, he understands the geography of everything, and that the importance of understanding where everything is in the scene, and the importance of an emotional kind of payoff, either whether that be, you know, through a sense of relief or a sense of comedy. And I think, you know, this scene is the perfect marriage of direction, action, performance, and effects and script. And you know, there's a quote again from somebody online on a blog, Flicks Chatter, where they talk about this scene. I still get teary-eyed every time I watch this scene. This is the first time the world is introduced to Superman. And by the time that rousing John Williams score comes on, we all believed a man can fly. There is such an irresistible optimism, hope, and unabashed jubilation when, in the nick of time, out of nowhere, the saviour flies out to catch the peril-prone reporter. The script peppers the movie with wonderful, memorable quips. You've got me. Who's got you? And I think, you know, that's another strength within Superman the movie, and that's in the writing. You know, it's interesting to note that Singer's Superman Returns plays homage to quite a number of kind of scenes from Superman the movie, you know, specifically in the plane rescue scene when you know, Superman kind of gets on the plane and reminds people that it is still the safest way to fly. You know, it's you know, it's interesting. You know, that ultimately it has such wonderful scripting moments that it's still kind of called upon and can't be bettered. Interestingly, the movie actually had 4 writers, including Mario Puzo, you know, who did some kind of script work for it. You know, but actually, there's actually kind of very little of Puzo's original script that remains. Tom Mankiewicz actually performed a final rewrite at Donner's request, and Mankiewicz had worked on some of Bond's best outings, such as uncredited rewrites on The Spy Who Loved Me, a shared credit on The Man with the Golden Gun, and actually he wrote, actually, which is probably one of arguably Roger Moore's best Bond films, which he wrote Live and Let Die. You know, and I think the script is a great example of why great scripts aren't written, they're rewritten. And it's quite funny because you get a lot of online movie critics going on about, you know, movies having several script writes, but this is really common. You know, they always say great novels are never written, they're rewritten. And you know, it's funny because you've got the Tommy Westfall universe in kind of American kind of sitcoms where everybody's kind of interlinked, and these days it's called expanded universe. Actually, if Puzo had got his way, actually Superman the movie would have been a very, very early example, probably the first example of an expanded universe, because he'd actually written Telly Savalas' Kojak into the script, which is, which is bizarre to kind of think that if that had come off, we could have had a first example of an expanded universe there. It's also a script that really takes its time. It actually gives us a slow build. It takes its time to develop characters and incidents and help us understand Clark's makeup as a person and the values instilled with him as a young man. And the heartbreak of and understand the fragility of human life. And it almost feels like today's movies are very obsessed with what I'll call the Bond opening, that attentions won't be grabbed and held unless a film starts with a shock or an action scene. But Superman the movie places character and great performances above flashy special effects, and it's probably testament to the type of movie that was made in the 70s rather than the type of movie that was made in the 80s. The script is also incredibly grounded. The plot of stolen missiles and the San Andreas Fault isn't too far-fetched. The weight of somebody's death in the third act hits really hard, and you understand that Clark has been helpless before with a death, but now he has the powers to turn back time and not to have been burdened with those emotions again. And I think that moment of Lois's death and Superman's anger and emotional weight really is felt. And I know a lot of people kind of laugh about the whole thing about him turning back time, but I actually think it really works here. So to kind of close off and in summary of it, we go back to the Guardian's thoughts on Superman the movie. The reason we have the monolithic Marvel films today is because of Superman. The reason we have Caped Crusader movies is because Donner's box office hit encouraged Warner Brothers to make Batman at Pinewood Studios in 1989 with Mankiewicz's fingerprints on the script, a big score, a physical production, and that comic strip panel sense of America and adventure. And, whether you agree or not with Superman the movie, still being the gold standard of comic book movies, I think it's a healthy debate to add, but I would argue that there's no film that comes close to it. Maybe Dark Knight, Nolan's series, comes close. Certainly, Endgame and Iron Man and things like that have some, great moments. But really, certainly when it comes to origin films, and I would argue again, just downright comic book movies, there's no movie out there in the comic book land at the moment that compares to Richard Donner's 1978 Superman the movie. So agree or disagree, drop a comment below. And if you've liked this episode, then tell us what you think. If you hated it, tell us what you think. And thank you for listening. Catch you later.